workshop part of our board meeting. And to start it off, we will have a call to order.
Mrs. Russell?
Aye. Here.
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here.
Mrs. Hill?
Here.
And Mr. Boyan?
Did you hear me? Hi?
Are you here? Okay.
Did you hear me?
Mr. Dave Boyer is participating in this particular board meeting via Zoom. Hopefully he'll be able to see us so he can get more out of the meeting and we can get all of his input. And because he is participating via Zoom, all of our votes will be roll call, just to let everybody know. Do we have any community or staff participation for the workshops? No? Well then I would say let's get started. And we need to hand this over to Dr. Nyan for an update on potential solar PPA projects.
Yes, we have Mike Beverly joining us via Zoom to present the locations of the solar projects that we've been looking at. And our director is also here, as well as CJ Nolan, and he will be here to answer any questions as well. Thank you.
So at this time, we're going to turn it over to you, Mr. Beverly.
Great, thank you. Thank you, team from the district, as well as board members. Nice to be back, and thank you for having me here this afternoon. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Yeah.
Sorry, was that a yes?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay? Great. So I think, CJ, are you driving the PowerPoint presentation here?
I am now.
So CJ, if you want to go ahead and flip to the next slide, or whoever's on the slides here. What we've got here is some information looking at each of your schools and that are taking into consideration solar arrays on your campuses. So before we look at each of your schools, what I've got here is a little bit more information about what these arrays look like and some of the ways that we have used them in the past for different school district customers. So one way that a lot of schools like to use these arrays are for shade structures. So these are a couple examples here. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, this is from Redondo Beach Unified School District, where they use the solar canopy as a shade structure alongside a soccer field that parents and students get to take advantage of. If you go to the next slide, these are a couple more examples of shade structure arrays. So the top left, this is Redondo Beach Unified at Toledo Elementary, where the shade is used by students in a grass area along the blacktop that they play under. And then down in the bottom right, this is from Central School District, where we actually installed the array on the blacktop, and the kids can take advantage of the shade while they're playing out on the blacktop. So we've seen a number of different use cases for these shade structures, depending on the usage of the site and the locations that are available. We've also heard recently from a number of school districts that are looking to utilize the canopies for outdoor learning environments. So that's another consideration that districts are looking to use going forward for these arrays. If you go back, or if you go to the next slide, this is sort of a more traditional carport system. Up in the top left, that's Laguna Hills High School, their parking lot there. And then the bottom right, this is Tustin Unified School District. So really the same structure in terms of what it looks like, but there are several different uses for it. And what we've done for your solar project and for your schools is to try to locate the arrays in locations where the shade is beneficial and the energy production is useful to the site, each of the sites there. So if you can go to the next slide. So this is the first example of the solar layouts that we have proposed here. And what you'll see is the picture on the left is an aerial image of your district office. The blue box that you see there is the proposed solar array. And then the red, yellow, or the red X you can see down there at the bottom of the picture. That's the Southern California Edison meter. So that's the location that we would be planning to physically tie our solar system into your electrical system on the grid. And then the yellow line that you see there connecting the two, that's the proposed conduit path where we would run the conductor and conduit all the way back to the meter. And then on the right, what you can see is there's a little bit of information about each of the arrays. And so you've got the total number of solar modules, the total generating capacity, and then a little bit of information on the azimuth or the orientation of the solar arrays in terms of what direction is it facing and at what angle is it tilted. So we have one of these for each of your sites, and I'm happy to go through each of those and describe in a little bit of detail what we were thinking. At this point, what we've done is we have had engineers at each of your sites. So they have walked the grounds, they've looked at your metering equipment and your electrical gear, and looked at your parking lots and campuses to determine if there are any potential obstructions or issues with the array placements that we've proposed here. We've also taken some gotten some initial feedback from the team at the district office on uses and potential best locations for these arrays. What we haven't done yet is we haven't done our full diligence on real estate easement and title issues, which would be the first thing that we would do if we were ultimately under contract and approved to be the solar provider for your district. So, there has been some thought and some work done in these layouts, but we're certainly open to feedback from members of the board, the district, and administration on final array locations. So what we have here at the district office, we have about 250 kilowatt array that's on the west side of the parking lot that right now is spanning over partially the parking lot and partially onto the grass area there. So providing some shade for the parking area as well as potentially the grass field on the left there.
And then Michael, before you go forward, I'd just like to share a few, both just a reminder for the board and perhaps the community who might be watching from home, that this really is our second board workshop on this process. And so at our last board workshop, the board wanted to see where would these arrays look like at our school sites. And so we have sent these schematics to the board after that workshop. But also know that one of the things that we can continue to do is make changes. So part of the process of if we partner with PFMG is that they would also help us solicit input from principals, from the school site, perhaps even in a normal school year at back to school night. They might give information to the community, et cetera. I just want to remind everyone that this solar concept is really about a lease of the equipment. So this is a no cost to the district. We do not have bond dollars that will be able to allow us to enter into this. Instead, what we're doing is should we move forward with this, rather than having annual increases of electricity by Southern California Edison, which is who we purchase our power through, that we have 3 different pricing options that we can lease the energy for up to 30 years, and then PFMG would restore it back to where it is at the end of the contract, or we would renew a contract, et cetera. So this is a no-cost option to the district that hopefully will allow us to actually save electrical cost. So I just wanted to remind people about what that process is. And then even, for example, here at the district office, the list of arrays that are there. We also want to be mindful that any place that we put these structures, they're relatively permanent. I mean, a 30-year structure. So you're going to want to make sure that we don't have any future plans in that space. Otherwise, it's going to be probably at a cost to us. And so one area we know is that LAVE has had some big dreams to perhaps have their own building, maybe, as opposed to just a little room out of the front of our main campus. And if so, they might want to do a portable building out towards the back end of that field. Might be a good location. So we might want to move some of those arrays. I already think I'd like to have some of the arrays along that middle parking row there, because I think a lot of staff here would benefit from that, as well as people who are going to the field, using the field as well, to have some shade structure for the parking lot and some shade structure for the grass. So the nice thing about working with PFMG is we're not locked into anything they're showing you right now. Well, even if we move forward and sign a contract, they will allow us to make changes, even if it's less arrays that they're showing under the ultimate contract. So And then CJ has met with a few principals, and he's continuing. Now all of our principals have the summer break. So we'll re-engage that work with them, but we certainly will consult with the sites and get more site input as well. But it helps to have a visual as we move forward.
Andrew, may I ask a question? So in looking at this, have we looked at all how, two-part question, how it would be visually to the neighbors within the site of it? And then the second question is, are we under an obligation? Not that we wouldn't do it if we weren't under an obligation, but are we under an obligation to let the neighbors and community know where we're putting the structures?
So we, in terms of, we haven't done any renderings of what they would look like in the given areas. I don't know if that's something that Mike's team normally does. We can certainly see the ideas just from the sample pictures that are part of this board workshop and the other. But yes, we would notify. Part of the great partnership with PFMG is they would actually help us with a community. I don't want to say a campaign because it's not a campaign. It's no cost to us. But informing the community of where these are as well. And they've worked with communities that have had various opinions that might not like certain areas. And so they've been able to scale things back. We've also tried to use that knowledge that we already know about our community as we took a look at these plans moving forward. So even you'll notice later when they look at the high school, you'll notice it's mostly the back parking lot, but we made sure we didn't do the whole first row of the ones that are closer to those houses that neighbor the parking lot. Within Rossmore, some of them more, and they serve our needs too, the shade structure more along the fields than right in the center of parking lots. I live in Tustin. Just about every school in Tustin, at least their middle school and high schools, have them. I don't find them offensive at all. I think they actually look really nice. They're a good thing for the environment, and they actually serve a lot of different purposes. So I don't find them obtrusive, but again, that's one person's opinion. And I live right next to a middle school in Tustin that has these.
Thank you very much.
Great. And thank you for that, Dr. Pulver. Definitely agree with all of your points there. And I think ultimately what we would do if we move forward is after we're under contract, but before we start with construction, we would come back to the district and look for a final signed off array location for each of your sites. And so we'll be able to take into account what we discover during the real estate due diligence process, as well as feedback we get from the community sites, site staff, and other members of the district's community. So, as you mentioned, we've done some work on these layouts already, but we know there'll be some changes in the future, and we'll work with the district to be flexible and provide what you guys need. So next here we have Hopkinson Elementary. So this is an example of a shade canopy along the blacktop area and kind of between or along the grass and blacktop. So it's similar to the picture we looked at of Redondo Beach Unified.
And the one thing we made sure, and again, they will make changes, is we also don't want to decrease a soccer field or anything that either our community uses or that we use. So that we will absolutely take that into consideration. And I believe some of this work that they've already done, doing some of the site work, has incorporated that, but we'd also make sure that that doesn't inhibit that as well.
Yep, that's correct. I think definitely site usability from different groups, whether it's the school, AYSO, other groups, is definitely something that we want to take into account here on the array locations. Any other comments on Hopkinson?
I just wanted to say, as we go through the schools at Rossmore, one of the biggest distinctions between the locations is we're choosing a lot of times the more central areas of the campus instead of the parking lots to make it a useful space for students, and it wouldn't be obtrusive to the surrounding neighborhood.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, actually, I have a question. Because I remember so many parents groups always wanting to get shade structures over the lunch tables. And I am assuming the reason why we wouldn't put solar structure as shade structures over our lunch tables is that just the area is not big enough. Is that correct?
Michael, were you able to hear that?
No, could someone repeat that question?
Yeah, the question was, so the assumption is particularly at our elementary schools, really where ideal shade structure would be over the lunch tables. And is that an option in this or not, and why if not?
Well, in some cases it is an option. I think one of the things that we're looking for is that we need to stay at least 20 feet away from each of the buildings. That's one of the requirements that the DSA and California requires for building these arrays near buildings. So to the extent that we can find areas that are sufficiently far away from the building, then that's definitely an option and something that we've done before. But we do have some limitations to how close to the building we can go. And we also want to try to stay away from any obstructions that would significantly shade the solar. But to that extent, if there's open areas that are being utilized for lunch, then that's something that we could certainly consider as well.
Thank you.
Many, as you know, many of our lunch areas are very close to buildings. I don't think they're 20 feet away, and most of our sites at least.
Okay, that took care of that problem.
So here is Lee Elementary, and this one is also similar to Hopkinson, where we look to put the array towards the center in the interior of campus, along a blacktop area and along the grass there. So similar to what you saw from Redondo Beach Unified, utilizing that shade in an area where the kids are already playing and trying to keep the visibility from the street to a minimum. Here is a Los Alamitos Elementary School. So you can see we have two arrays here, one in the parking lot, and then we have one that extends partially over the track and then partially over the parking area there. So the columns from the array would not impede use of the track, but we would get a little bit of shade coverage over the southern portion of your track there. And then staying out of the way of the drive aisles there to the south of array B. And here is the high school. And as Dr. Pulver mentioned, we put most of the arrays or all of the arrays in I guess the back lot. And we also, you can see we kept a row of parking open there between that southernmost array, array C, and the homes there to the south. So the idea is by keeping some more space there, the homes and the neighbors will be less impacted by the addition of the arrays there. And then we also didn't put any arrays in the front lot there, so that lot remains open. Here at McAuliffe, we have a combination of some shade canopies as well as carport canopies. So you can see B is in the parking lot, and then array C is sort of along the grass area there to the south. And then array A, we have proposed over this sort of auditorium area up on the north side of campus. So that's another potential area that we saw on the site walks, and based on feedback, it seemed like some shade could potentially be beneficial to that area. And so we went ahead and included an array in that area.
I have a question.
Here is,
Excuse me, Mrs. Russell has a question. Thank you.
I'm looking at the McAuliffe and the C part. I would be interested in knowing if that would interfere in any way to a lot of the sports that go on in that area.
yeah, that's array C that you're considering that?
Yes.
Yep, yeah.
I think I can probably answer this one. So we are taking into account the field space, and when we are aligning it near the field, it's near the spectator areas primarily, and we'll be reviewing this to get accurate measurements to ensure that the field's still usable for any major game.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Michael, you can go to the next slide.
Perfect. Was McGaw before this? There we go. So McGaw, I think, is probably the most, seems to be the most challenging of the sites in terms of finding some array locations. So what we've done here is we found several different locations that work throughout the site. I think this is one where, because of the baseball fields, as well as some of the large trees to the south, that there wasn't one clear place where we could locate the arrays. So we tried to spread them around the campus a bit, but we're certainly open to continued discussions from the team at the district as to finalizing the location at McGough. But as it stands right now, this is about how much solar we need for the site, or we would look to size the site at optimally. But if there are some better location or some of these arrays need to be trimmed down, then that's something that we would be open to as well. Here at Oak, we have a combination of shade canopies and parking structures. So A and C are shade canopies, and then B is in the parking lot there. So we tried to fit this in around some of the usage of the site, including the baseball field, and then there's some large light standards down to the south as well that limited where we could go. But we were able to fit the solar in there in some areas that we think would be useful to the site and provide shade to some of the folks that are watching baseball games or softball games. Here's Rossmore. So what we did is we split the array into two there. So it sort of goes in connection there with the point on the blacktop. And so there'd be shade there at the point where the grass and the blacktop meet. And it seemed like when we were there were a lot of kids in that area, and that would potentially be useful. And then we also tried to reduce the length of some of the arrays so as to not to require any tree removal for some of the trees there were a little bit older. This is Weaver, and again, we've got a shade canopy here that goes along the grass and blacktop near some of the playground equipment, and extending sort of along the combination of the sand pit playground area, blacktop, and then the swing set area as well. And so finally, what we have here is kind of a high-level schedule in terms of next steps if the district so chooses to move forward, and what we'd be looking to do over the next several months. So the next step, if we go for an approval or go forward with an approval this summer, is we would look to have the district post 4217 notice, which goes out 2 weeks, excuse me, before the board votes on a solar contract. During the time that 4217 would be posted, and in the time leading up to that, we would continue to review array locations with administrative teams and staff, as well as review the contract for the solar project. All right, following up on that, there would be an approval of the contract by board vote sometime as early as July or August. And then what we would do, that would kick off the beginning of the real estate due diligence process, where we would order all of your title and easement reports, get a better understanding of what's going on at each of your schools underground, other utility easements or other considerations that we need to bring in locating our arrays. So during that same time, we'd also be working with the team at the district to provide community outreach efforts to the Los Alamitos community, neighbors and staff and members that are interested in the solar project. And so we've done a number of different things with different districts. We would have online information available at each of the sites about the solar project, and frequently asked questions. We also typically host some type of in-person meeting at a number of different sites so that members of the community that are interested can come in and learn about solar, get an understanding of the array locations and the benefits to the district, and provide potential feedback to the district and to us on the considerations that they have for solar. So following the real estate due diligence and the community outreach, what we would do is then look to finalize our array locations and our solar locations. And then we would get our final approval from the district, which would include a signature on each of the sites for the final array location, at which point we would then move forward with design and start to begin major procurement of equipment. So after we pass these checkpoints, then we're ready to ask your approval for final array locations and then move forward with the project and start doing the major expenditures to lead into construction. So this is a pretty high level schedule, and I think in a lot of ways we could probably do things, we could probably shorten the schedule up if needed, but this is generally the steps that we go through in anticipation of getting into construction and design on a solar project like the one we've proposed here for your district. So that's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions on what we've gone over today or anything else related to solar?
Yes, please. Two quick questions. Can you hear me? I'm like.
Yes, I can hear you.
So when you post the 4217, what does that mean? Where do you notice that?
So typically what most districts have done is they've posted a paper copy of a 4217 posting, which is something that, certainly your attorney can help to draft. But they would post that on the window at the district office, wherever you post your board agenda, and that would make for the official public posting of the 4217 notice.
And then, am I correct in saying that we do not have any responsibility of getting permits from either the county? Because, we have two cities and a county, an incorporated area, with which in our schools live. But we wouldn't have any responsibilities of going to either one of those cities or the county. Our responsibility is strictly to DSA, correct?
That's correct. So your responsibility is just to buy the energy coming from the arrays. It's our responsibility to handle permitting through the DSA or any other authority requiring permits. And that also includes to all required sign-offs with Southern California Edison, the utility. So all aspects of the project are covered by us under the power purchase agreement.
Michael, I have a question. Do you have to go through DSA because it's on a school site?
Yep.
Could you hear me?
Yeah, was the question about the DSA?
Yes.
Yeah, so we would seek our approval through the DSA
Okay, thank you.
for all of the sites.
All right. And Dr. Pulver?
So I just wanted to remind and kind of share the three different pricing structures, which we don't have a slide on that, but you will recall. One had an escalation price over, I think, up to a 3% every year. And I think it flattens out at year 15. Another one was having it go up less every year through the 30 year. And then another one was a fixed rate. And they have different pros and cons, just to remind you. The biggest savings across the life of the 30-year contract would be by locking in the rate. So you might pay a little bit more for energy year 1 or 2, but you actually lock that rate in for the 30 years. So based upon the savings projections along with our battery backup, and remember this will work with our battery, which is a separate project, that is the yields the most savings. And the only reason why maybe you wouldn't want to choose that is if you felt like you needed some to materialize more of the savings in year 1, 2, or 3. Right now, our staff's recommendation is we would recommend, and Nancy has also sought from Pac West, who's done our battery backup as well, and they were another vendor we considered to partner with this, but we think PFMG is the right partner for this. They have all of them in-house. Our recommendation is to lock ourselves into the single rate and yield this biggest savings overall. We don't know if it's worth the additional savings, maybe year 1, 2, or 3, quite honestly. And everything we're seeing, I'm sure you guys received an email not too long ago as well. Edison continues to propose rate increases. So based upon what PFMG has already shared with us, we can lock in that rate. That would be my recommendation. We will need to know that direction before, I assume. Does that decision need to be made at the award of the contract, Michael, or can that be changed between that and December?
Yeah, well, typically the PPA rate and escalation would be in the contract that's voted on and approved at the approval meeting. So we would look to have that finalized prior to approval.
So we can make sure we include for all of you, and we can review this week those 3 rating structures and give any more rationale why we think we should do the option of locking in the rate. And then the other thing I just wanted to show you is, again, if you even just look at this chart where you see the 2 stars, we might award a contract over the summer, but we still have time, and Mike has said this with other groups that they've worked with. If we find we want to make a change to the location of the arrays you just saw today, we have all the way through December. We have to literally sign off on each one. And so they don't nickel and dime us if we end up moving it further from where they had to do the connection site. As you can see, some of the sites have a pretty long connection, but they're more concerned about getting it right for us from the very onset. And that's why I think also they're just a great partner that we might be able to work with. And so what we're recommending is, the reason why we should enter into it soon is, you remember the federal tax credit for solar goes down an additional, is it 3% or 4% next year. So by us entering into the contract this year, solar won't be installed this year, but because we entered into the contract this year, they have reflected a portion of that savings into our rate structure. So if we wait till next year, I guarantee you the rate structure they would give us for next year to sign the contract will be slightly more, not significant, but slightly more than what we are doing. So we're just trying to maximize the savings to the community. In addition, if you think about it, just kind of the green energy aspect. And then at the last board meeting, Michael also shared, if we were interested, and we haven't really reached back out to him, he's reached to us, if we wanted to add any electrical charging stations or not. Michael, what I don't know, do you install those free of charge, or is that an additional cost to the district?
So there would be an additional cost to the district for the equipment, but we could certainly build that into the PPA rate and finance it under the rate. And the cost relative to the cost of the solar is relatively small. So it's not a major addition to your rate. But if you're interested in seeing what that looks like, we could definitely provide that as an option for you, and you guys would have the ability to make that choice.
And then in that model, who would yield so obviously if I go and I have an electric car and I plug it in, I assume I'm paying for that electricity. It's not free. So am I paying Los Alamitos Unified, or am I paying PFMG? Or can we set it up in a couple different ways?
Yeah, so what we would do actually is we would install the equipment ourselves, and then we would turn over ownership of the electric vehicle charger to the district. And the district would then have the ability to make a decision as to who charges, who's allowed to have access, what you charge. And so that decision would rest solely with the district, and none of the revenue of the EV charger would go to us.
Okay. So that would be some information we'd want to, and you would need to know that before we brought the contract forward?
Yeah, we would want to know that if that's included. If that's a part of the scope and included in the cost, then we would want to know that at that time.
Okay. So is that something you are interested in at least getting information on?
I am. We can't encourage people to purchase and drive electric cars if they're going to, although most of the time people don't have to drive that far to get to work, but the more electrical vehicle charging stations there are on the planet, the more people will get electric cars. So
Michael,
but it's a cost factor, so we need to know.
Do the electrical charging stations need to be next to the arrays? I'm thinking of like Los Alamitos High School, they're all in the back parking lot. Mm-hmm. People might want them closer to Cerritos Boulevard. Right. Or do they need, so is there any limitations on where they are?
No, not necessarily. They're not necessarily fed directly from the solar arrays. So if it makes sense to put them somewhere else, then we could do that. That's not a problem.
Okay.
We could probably locate them near any one of the substations from the infrastructure project.
Yeah. Okay, so I would say if you wanted to give us, includes more information for us on what that would look like, and we could share that with the board in our weekly packet as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can get that over to you fairly quickly.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Boyer as well?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I know I asked this question last time, and I know we talked, and I got a good answer, but as we look from the bigger picture, because I'm always looking at the big picture, you can see electric vehicles are coming down the road left and right. We were one of the first districts that advantage of the AQMD when we went to natural gas buses and putting stations over at our auxiliary. I know we don't have a unit over at our, we're not putting panels in over our auxiliary, but in the bigger scope of things, as things seem to be going green, I don't know if there are grants, if we have any plan to, I know we have electric carts at the high school that we charge with other chargers and things already. Would we want to look at electric vehicles and charging stations for those for district vehicles down the road? And that's a bigger picture, I know, but if we're going to be putting this infrastructure in, maybe we want to think about having the capability if we were going to go that direction on cost savings, since we have a small district that electric vehicles can get around and we're not going 500 miles. So just a thought.
Well, I would say one thing that we have done for other districts that maybe aren't ready to do full EV chargers at this time is we've included spare conduits. So running from the solar array back to the meter, since we're going to be there anyway and we're installing some of our own equipment, if we're already running conduit and conductors, wires basically back there, we could always put in a couple extra for the district at pretty minimal cost. And then you guys are basically pre-plumbed for future EV chargers. And that is something that we've done often. We're doing that at Fullerton Elementary School District right now. And I could provide an option to that as well.
And we have had some staff members in the past who have asked us, would we ever consider putting in charging stations? So we have, and I think Dave is right, Mr. Boyer is right, that we'll have more staff and community members over time having electrical vehicles, but certainly members of the high school staff have asked here at the district office as well. I'm not sure you'd want it at every location, but perhaps, I can think of LAE's probably, that parking lot's used a lot in the summertime, and for other venues besides the school site, that might be a good place. The high school here at the district office, maybe somewhere down in Seal Beach, I'm not sure, but there might be a few places that we would have to figure out where there might be a good place for that.
Okay. Thank you,
That
Michael.
sounds great.
Appreciate your presentation. It's very informative, and we're looking forward to getting more information and discussing this in the future.
Great. Thank you very much for having me back.
Thank you.
Okay, our next workshop is an update, which I believe Dr. Pulver said we'd be doing this on a regular basis, on our contingency planning and reopening of schools workshop. So I believe it was going to be Dr. Pulver and Mrs. Reed giving the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Madam President, esteemed members of the board. At our last board meeting, we gave a work update on where we are with our contingency planning. And one of the things that we've pledged to our parent and school community is that we'll be updating the board every workshop until the school sites reopen. And so we've informed them to stay tuned to our workshops. They are available on YouTube Live, and they're available to the community anytime afterwards as well. And so what Mrs. Reed will be sharing with all of you is what the level of work or planning that we've done since our last board meeting. So at our last board meeting, we shared the results of our surveys out to our parents, both on our calendar and on feedback of the previous distance learning model, along with the different hybrid options or virtual options or traditional option, et cetera. We've since then surveyed our staff as well with very similar questions so that we kind of could compare feedback. So what Mrs. Reed will be showing you today of the results is, you already saw the parent surveys, but she'll layer in the staff survey so you can see how they look similarly. And then the work that the committee has been doing. Right now, the committee's focus has mostly been on the virtual. One of the things we have pledged and we know that we'll be doing, and we'll be offering two options. So for any family member out there or community member who does not feel that coming to school in either a traditional or a hybrid approach is the right environment for their child, we will have a 100% virtual option for them. And so we're exploring curriculum and different options there. And then we are also looking at, as we've shared, our goal is to be able to find a way to bring kids in a more traditional setting. But if we can't do that, then we'll also have a backup plan of a hybrid version. And so Mrs. Reed will just go ahead and give you an update with the work that the committee has done. It's been a very large group of individuals who are committed to making this work. She's expanded the committee when we're looking at curriculum, which she'll share further. And then for those members who weren't able to participate or pay attention or tune in, I should say, not pay attention, tune in, I will give a summary a little bit more. I'll do some of the slides tonight in my superintendent's report as well, just to make sure that the community had an option to kind of see, because I know this is on everyone's mind. So I'm going to turn it over now to Mrs. Reed.
Thank you, Dr. Pulver, Madam President. So as Dr. Pulver shared, this is our update number 2 to the board on contingency planning. And Dr. Pulver did quickly review these. These were the items that we updated the board with last time we were together. And I think the big one that we talked about last time was really the introduction of a remote teaching distance learning committee, which really is a really robust group of 52. And we've now expanded that to 72 members, as I'll explain, as we're looking at plans for reopening. And so as Dr. Pulver alluded to, we did follow up our parent survey with the teacher survey, really asking the same type of questions at this moment in time. What would your preference be if you were to return to work, and in which type of settings would you feel comfortable instructing students? And so just as a reminder, we had a very large response in our parent survey. So we had really, my clicker's not working, Miss Tina. It is on. Let me just come to your computer.
We have a lot of technology going on at the same time at our board meeting. That's all I can say.
Perfect. So as a reminder, we had a very large response on our parent survey with over 5,000 parents sharing their feedback. We also had a large response equally from our teaching staff, with 337 teachers completing the survey. And so what you'll see here is we've combined the data from the parent surveys with the teacher survey. So the teacher responses are there in the bolded blue and a slightly yellow shaded column that's actually hard to see in this projection. But the overall initial question that we asked both parents and our teachers was, if under guidance of local, state, and federal health officials, if we were given the flexibility to reopen in a normal, traditional, in-person setting with limited no restrictions, what would your preference be at this time? And you can see that we have a pretty good congruence across our teaching and parent communities. If we just, for example, take a look at 612, we have 77% of parents saying they'd feel comfortable returning, 73% of our teaching staff. We look at elementary, 78% of our parents and 87% of our staff. And then if we look down to the percentages that would then choose 100% remote or online virtual learning platform, we're really not that far off. We look at 19 and 13% and 21 and 26%. So I think this is great information for the committee as we looked at, as we make these decisions and get further into the summer, closer to the start of the school year, will we have a great matching of staff that would then in turn want to provide this remote or online instruction for families who choose it? And I think that we find ourselves in a really good spot by just using this initial data as a way to predict that. Yes, Mrs. Davidson.
Sorry to ask a question so fast. Clarification for the teachers, when they say like they prefer the virtual learning, 13% and 26%, are they saying they would prefer that because it would be better for the kids, or they want to teach that way?
They want to teach that way. Okay, so the question was, where would you prefer either providing services if you were, for example, an SLP or a school psychologist, or providing instruction at your grade level within your content or department? And so they're saying they would prefer to teach in an online setting.
Thank you for the clarification.
Absolutely.
Great.
One of the things that we're trying to make sure is, as we're looking at the different options, is that we can also staff those options appropriately as well. We have shared with our staff that if they were doing a virtual program, they will likely be working here and they're at their school site in a classroom, because that's where all of our materials, that's where we think we can do the most powerful teaching remotely, et cetera. We still might need to offer trainings and staff meetings, et cetera, so they're still part of a staff, so that they will be working most likely from a virtual standpoint here within their school setting.
So as we looked at the next scenario, we asked if we were able to return in a hybrid model, would you participate in the hybrid model and or want to teach in the hybrid model, or prefer then to teach or participate in a 100% remote or online program? And you can see that the numbers between our staff and teachers still remain pretty consistent. You can also notice that that's where you see a higher percentage of elementary teachers than preferring to teach remote in lieu of participating in an environment where they may have expectations to provide in-classroom instruction combined with the blended online instruction. We then asked, would you have your child attend a school, or would you as a staff member teach in a school where face coverings are optional? And you can see that we have 79% of elementary teachers saying yes and 64% of secondary teachers saying yes. So still pretty closely aligned to the parent survey. And then you can see that our numbers do increase when we look at no, then we would prefer a full-time virtual learning program. 23% at the elementary level for parents, 18% for teachers, 26% for parents at the secondary level, and 34% for teachers. And so just a reminder to the board, it's been about 3 weeks now that this parent survey closed. And so I know that as time progresses, so do people's perspectives on returning to school and what that looks like. And so we have communicated both out to our teaching staff and our parent community that as the time continued to roll on, we would re-engage them with additional surveys to re-get their input and look at where their preference and mindset was as things evolved and changed in our county. And so the next question is, would you return to teaching and or send your child back to school if face coverings were required? And so you can see 80% of our teaching staff at the elementary and secondary pretty much in alignment, with about 18% saying at that point they would prefer to teach a completely online component if they were required to wear a face covering during. And we didn't really specify if it was completely during the instructional day or not. We just used face coverings required. So I think that's also been in my committee where teachers wanted a little bit more nuanced of questions next time around. When you say face coverings, is that just when I'm traversing the halls, or is that when I'm providing all of my instruction? Because that would definitely change what some of the teachers shared with us, the way they would respond to this question. And then what we did here is we combined the secondary and elementary responses. This is about childcare. And so we kept all the TK-12 parent responses into one column on the left and the TK-12 staff or teacher responses into one column on the right. And it really was, if children weren't able to return to a normal, traditional in-person setting, what would your child care plan be during the school day? And for staff, we said, what would your child care plan be during the school day if you were working at the school site, but your children were not enrolled in a normal traditional setting? And so here you can see that we do have a significant segment of both our parent and our staff that would be, our teaching community, that would be in need of access to some type of childcare. And so that always opens up a larger question. I know Dr. Pulver and I have had this discussion, but we continue to have with the committee, is if we were in, for example, a hybrid model, we don't really know where we would provide this additional child care, because if we had space to bring students on campus, at that point, why wouldn't we be providing instruction for them? And so it becomes very challenging when we look at the hybrid planning, because in a hybrid planning model, we're using all of our classrooms with just about 50% of the occupancy of students in them. So there isn't an abundance of open classrooms where we then could provide childcare when students weren't on their instruction day. So a lot of more questions that we're having to kind of unpack. Also looking at what other school districts are doing. Some school districts have released some of their reopening plans, and so some of the initial thoughts from other districts were that they would provide this childcare in an outdoor setting, in their lunch tables, on their fields, using paraprofessionals or lunch supervisors. So those are all things that we're also talking about and we'll continue to get feedback on. We then asked teachers, a teacher-only question really, do you feel it's practical for the students at your grade level and within the discipline that you teach or provide services to wear face coverings during class time? And so you can see here that at the elementary level, 62% of our staff feel no, it is not practical. And at the secondary level during class time, 67% feel it is practical. We then asked though, do you feel it's practical during passing periods, recess or lunch? And we have a resounding from our staff, no, 70+% at both the elementary and the secondary levels in terms of wearing a face covering during passing periods, recess, or lunch. So using that information, using the guidance and the county perspective that's been shared with us, the state's reopening framework, we've continued to meet with our 52 members of our remote teaching and distance learning committee. And as you know, Dr. Pulver shared that we've really prioritized working on the remote setting. As you can clearly see from the data, we know there will be a population of our families who, regardless of the way we open schools, are going to for 100% virtual. And since we decided to do that, we did expand our committee, as we shared earlier, to 72 members strong. And so we included 20 additional teachers to the team because the priority currently of our committee is vetting a comprehensive digital learning platform and curriculum. So very different than the mechanism we deployed for emergency distance learning. This is a fully comprehensive learning management system with scope and sequence of intact courses, K through 12, all A through G and College Board approved. So this would give teachers really a robust set of tools to give assessments online, to do video chats, discussion boards, have the curriculum scope and sequenced out for them by professionals who've been doing this work for quite some time, as well as have the opportunity for some really purposeful professional development from professionals and experts in the field that have been training teachers to teach remotely for some of these companies 15 plus years now. And so that's been our primary goal over the course really since June 9th. And so since we last met here and updated the board, we sent that reopening schools survey to our teachers. We sent out a modified version of the CDE Reopening Schools Guide. So it's about a 66-page document that our internal team highlighted down to a 7-page workable document to overview with our committee. We also are currently reviewing the OCDE and California Department of Public Health guidance that was released last week. The California Department of Health guidance really seems to be a more robust document and has some really specifics that we're able to use as tangible pieces moving forward. We've held regular committee meetings where we did choose as a committee to prioritize the virtual schooling component. We held a drop-in Zoom meeting for questions and concerns from those additional 20 who were joining us to really catch them up to speed. So when we started our vendor presentations, we would have all of those questions answered. And so we have had, up till today, 3 vendor presentations. We've looked at K-8 Calvert Learning, 612 Edmentum, and K-12 Edgenuity. And so also today, Dr. Frazier joined myself and Stacy Schmitz to sit down and start talking about some of the bigger questions that have come about in the committee that are really more HR focused, that do deal with a virtual schooling environment. Things like a staffing impact with virtual schooling option. Those teachers who may want to teach virtually or not want to teach virtually, or what if the 612-hour sections end up that you have a teacher that needs to teach 2 sections virtually and 2 sections in brick and mortar? How will we evaluate virtual teachers? What would their virtual class size be? And what would working expectations be of a split teacher who was then really kind of involved in 2 staffs, this online staff as well as a brick and mortar staff? So a lot of questions that Joe is going to now kind of take that baton and work with LAEA to make sure that by the time we're ready to start, we have a great set of expectations and practices in place that both LAEA and ourselves have really clearly communicated, described our behavior, and we're really ready to start two really amazing starts for our school year. One that we don't know what it will look like in our brick and mortar quite yet, but also this online or virtual schooling option. And so the upcoming committee work that we have is we have our last vendor presentation tomorrow with schools PLP. June 26th, we have our virtual schooling leads meeting. So one of the things that we've done to really be concise and purposeful about gathering and garnering information from 72 stakeholders at these meetings is after every presentation, we have our members complete an online survey specific to what they've learned about that vendor. They don't have to do it right after the meeting. They actually get a sandbox or a kind of a faux account login, and they're able to play around with their virtual kind of demo account for a couple of days before completing that survey. So we're meeting with the leads of our subcommittee for virtual schooling to go through all of the information that our 72 members have given us on the 4 platforms. That lead committee is then going to facilitate a subcommittee meeting on June 30th, where we're going to review with the subcommittee all of the vendor feedback and then develop our final ranking survey that we will send out to the 72 members. Then on July 7th, we'll meet with our large expansion committee of 72 and hopefully make a vendor selection, sharing out the work the subcommittee and the leads did, sharing out the final ranking. I'm really hoping at that time a couple of the vendors will have risen to the top, so our debrief will be really specific as to measuring apples and oranges between 2 companies instead of 4. So I kind of think of it as sitting on an interview panel, right? The first job of the first round is just to kind of filter down the candidates. So right now we're really filtering down the vendors so we can have a more purposeful discussion using that teacher feedback from the surveys and live teacher interaction. As Dr. Pulver shared, we have continued to facilitate these meetings of 72 in a split format of half of our participants virtually and half in person. And then July 7th through the 15th, we're going to be kicking off our planning for traditional schooling and hybrid schooling for starting the 2020-2021 school year. And so really just kind of outlined a timeline for the board of what we're hoping to project. And that would be the week of July 14th, or actually the board meeting of July 14th, bringing forward to the board a vendor recommendation for virtual schooling, and hopefully sharing that week in review a traditional and hybrid draft plan of what reopening of schools would potentially look like for us. The week of July 27th, finalizing both our traditional and our hybrid plan, as well as putting forth to our community the marketing materials that we'll curate for our virtual schooling as we're really starting to advertise this option to our community. And then the week of August 3rd, or hopefully sooner, we would communicate our full reopening plans to our community, as well as start our virtual schooling enrollment. So after August 3rd, a lot of really heavy lifting is going to come and not only impact us here at the district office, but also as our sites. Because as students choose to enroll in our virtual platform, right, we're going to have staffing shifts at our school sites, master schedule changes, as well as an additional layer of teacher and student trainings, both for our virtual platform as well as the reopening plans, whether that's traditional or hybrid in our brick and mortar setting. So there's a lot of work that we have ahead of us. Planning modifications for the traditional school reopening is really going to be our priority after July 7th, after we have that vendor selected. We still need to sit down and look at the special education impact across settings. It's a completely separate discussion that's very, very important. We've just started scheduling our mental health and trauma-informed instruction PD planning. We all know that our students underwent really 2 major events if you want to think about the time that we've been away from our school sites. So it started with our school closures and COVID-19, but I think we can't not bring to the attention really the unrest that's existing in our country currently when we look at race relations. And so it's really coming back to school is going to be new and different in many ways. And so we need to make sure that our staff are prepared to meet our students where they're at and respond in moments of empathy. And so we're also going to be moving forward collaborating with alternate departments. So after this plan is facilitated, there's a lot of people that are connected to it. So we're looking at how these outcomes affect facilities, technology, custodial, human resources, student services. So there's a lot of moving pieces here that we need to make sure we're really orchestrating together, really timely, so that we're opening an amazing program for all of our students, and then that we're doing a great job with communication. So I think that the closer we get to the start of our school year, the more communication and chunks. There's a lot of information, right, that we're providing our families so they have time to digest it and feel comfortable either choosing to join us in a new virtual setting or return to our brick and mortar campuses. So if the board has any questions, I'd love to answer those.
Let's go ahead. Oh, thanks. Sorry. So the week of the 27th of July, you're going to have the final plans. And then the 3rd is when you will launch the reopening plans. At that point, will you have chosen between the hybrid or actual on-campus teaching? You will have, so there'll be the remote and either or. Okay, thank you. That's great.
Absolutely.
Good.
Best laid plans.
What's the timeline to have our students make that decision? And once they make that decision, are they committed to that decision?
So I think it's really going to be twofold. So we're planning to start July 27th, really communicating out what our virtual schooling option would look like. So in our internal plan, that looks like holding parent workshops and presentations in partnership with our vendors via Zoom, where parents can come and learn about what our virtual schooling option would look like. And then really potentially starting August 3rd, And we haven't decided on an end date, so 1 week or 2 weeks of enrollment where parents would have to select that they are committing to be part of our virtual schooling, because we will need at least 2 weeks to redo our master schedule, move staff over to the virtual schooling option. And I think that we will have to get a commitment for the school year from parents to participate in our virtual schooling, with the caveat that if they feel they'd like to return and we can accommodate them in an enrollment, we would do so at a natural time. So I don't think that we could ever commit that we would be able at any time to take back any student, because if you think about a kindergarten classroom at 24-1, we're full. But if a student, I'm going to make this up, at winter recess decides with a family they really feel safe coming back, and we have a kindergarten class at 22 and they're a resident, with us, I don't see why, or don't have to be a resident with us, a student with us. I don't know why we wouldn't accommodate that request. So I kind of been thinking of it like an intra-district request. We always grant those based off of space in our classrooms. And I would hope we would work with families, in particular at the secondary level, to do that at a natural time, whether it's the quarter, a semester break. Of course, special instances arise, and we want to do always what's best for students. But as you're ending one course of study online, where the scope and sequence might not exactly match the scope and sequence in our classrooms, I think we'd also want to work with the parents to pick an optimal time for the student to return and be successful in our campuses as well.
And that is something we would absolutely have to communicate to families, that if they're making this decision, that unraveling something like, if you see the complexity just of the planning that has occurred, and really the staffing that gets tied to it as well, and the curriculum commitments, that it is a cost to us in a year of cuts to implement this virtual. And so we're going to be charged probably by the number of students in the virtual when we adopt a virtual classroom. So there is going to have to be some skin in the game from the community or parents who make this decision, that we try not to say people are locked in, but I also want to be upfront and honest that may be the case. And when we can make modifications, absolutely. But if suddenly 20% of our student population wanted to be in virtual, and in 4 months now they all wanted to change back, I'm not sure that would be an option. So we would want to make sure people know, have the information, so that they're making an informed decision prior. And so I have also been on several conversations with superintendents, both within our county and across the county. Just was on one today, and for what I'm hearing is, at least within Riverside County, many of the school districts in Riverside County will be looking to start school back in a traditional setting, and then have a virtual option for those that do not. In fact, a few of the school districts, the superintendents or the school district communicated, the virtual setting will not be able to apply the social distancing requirements. And so if you want your child to be in a program that has those social distancing, you're going to want to enroll your child. You don't even have to enroll. You're going to want to select the virtual option. We will have an option for everyone, but we certainly are starting to see that some people are moving forward with that. And so we will be continuing to make plans in that. Rest assured for our community, depending upon where you lie on what you think is best for your child, we'll have a program for that. And we're going to continue making sure that the plans that we can create, we can also staff as well. We will be guided by, one of the common questions that I'm often asked are these guidelines or restrictions, because sometimes the people hear the word guidance and they think that there's some flexibility in that. And then what are the restrictions? Right now, we are hearing that Orange County Public Health Care Agency is going to defer making any formalized, stricter restrictions. They're going to defer to the California Department of Public Health, which is really the state agency of the county agency. And so they may change their mind. One thing we've seen across the board is changes have occurred almost weekly, it seems. And so that's been one of the challenges here. But the California Department of Public Health, their guidelines do give a lot of different scenarios, because while they'll make recommendations and give language, they'll also say to the extent possible, where feasible. because there may be some situations that I think every superintendent across the state is having this dialogue, and I'm sure boards are as well. In fact, I think they're having them with their boards, is where do you weigh, obviously there's the science of all of this, and as long as we can provide an option for families that with that, but where do you also weigh the extent of the other harm that is happening to students? And so when we just think of to the extent possible, we also have to layer in our own thinking about what we know about kids. And so we know the inequities in learning that occurred when we were in the emergency distance learning. We know there was significant learning loss for some students, particularly students of various challenges. Students with special needs, we've heard from many of our parents about the level of regression. We've heard from students who are English language learners, students who just naturally, I shouldn't say naturally, that's a bad choice. Students who have, even in the best educational setting, have struggled. And so that this distance learning was not the most beneficial for them. The level of anxiety as well, the social emotional health we have to factor into when we think about the extent possible. The level of anxiety and depression and mental health concerns have certainly risen within the county as well. Even looking with, I've heard from various families, both students with special needs and not, who they're not so sure that their child can engage a whole day with a face mask covering in the classroom. I think that's why you saw some things with teachers, elementary teachers, know that might be very difficult. So we're also really pressing even these types of coverings, and they're still a covering, but they're at least clear where you can see the affect of students and you can see the affect of teachers as well. We read an article in Politico recently that the American Pediatrics organization, now there might be a few organizations, so I'm not sure, we're looking to see, are they the official national one? But they've also really communicated that there are some concerns about the lack of socialization. The face coverings could do more harm for kids, for some of the breathing, for the socialization, how much we communicate non-verbally, and so that is causing harm to kids' developmental growth as well. And so these are difficult challenges. It's not so cut and dry with just what does the science say and that ignore everything else that we're hearing about what we know is in the best interest of students. And so that's why we're working really hard to try to find some option for traditional setting with some modifications, as well as provide a virtual option for our students. We're also extremely concerned about the lack of supervision. In a hybrid program, as you heard Mrs. Reed and myself share at the last board meeting, over 50% of our families, it was 55% of our families, TK through 8th grade, shared that they're going to need some type of supervision for their child because they can't provide it. They don't have a family member. And it was about almost 40% of our staff members. It was 37, 38% if you added up those percentages. And so when you have to factor in that we could have kids unsupervised at home if we have a hybrid program as well, we have to take all that information and factor it in. Is it possible with social distancing as well? And so the guidance from the California Department of Public Health does allow school districts and communities to layer in all of these very difficult decisions as we move forward. And so we face these same challenges. We're looking at it from a lot of different lenses, and we hope that we'll be able to make those decisions. Not hope, we will make those decisions by the end of July so that we can clearly communicate to our families either by the week of August 3rd. We actually hope earlier, but you know, we always want to under promise and over deliver to let families know. And so you'll actually hear me talk about tonight. We're also trying to plan some type of jump start for our students who are in an SDC setting the week of 2 weeks in August. And so I'll talk a little about that later tonight. But we've certainly heard from our families, the students with special needs, particularly in the SDC settings, that they're going to, it's been 5 months since they've been in a regular classroom, but they're going to need some structure and just routines and things taught. So,
Dr. Pulver, I do have a question. I personally have already said this, and I think probably almost everybody in education really wants our kids back in a traditional classroom with a teacher who can see them and connect with them and all that kind of wonderful stuff that we really took for granted until last March. So if we do a hybrid version, and the virtual. I know that we'll always have the virtual
will.
for the option. There's some, I understand, well, it's either some child or a family member who really cannot take the risk of going out in public. And there's no way any of our sites are going to be sterile. We'll keep them as clean as we can, but we can never say they're totally germ-free. So I understand we'll always have that virtual option. But let's say we start in a hybrid and things get better, even though we go into flu season, but things are better. Would we be able to perhaps at a semester go back to all traditional and the virtual, or is that just another layer that you're going to deal with later?
So I would think of it as two models. So there's a virtual model and there's an in-person model. And this in-person model can either be more the traditional class size, et cetera, or the hybrid. Between the in-person model, if we need to, we could probably adjust in between. It's really whether or not the virtual, how much interplay between the in-person. And so we also know, no matter what plans we design, we have to be thoughtful about should there be a need to, which you hear various people say there won't be a need. Who knows? Dr. Foster, I think, was recorded saying he doesn't think there'll be another shutdown in the fall, but I think other people think differently. That we would be able to be nimble, and so even in a traditional setting, would still have various precautions taken into place, and we'd have some virtual, some extended, I would say online programs or things that we would be able to assist teachers to help them deliver a deeper level of curriculum and lessons and instruction than what was done during the emergency situation March 16th.
Okay, and I want to thank Mrs. Reed for going into the weeds. I was actually at Costco and somebody heard that I was on a school board, and I all of a sudden was surrounded by about 5 moms who, different schools, none of them went to LaSalle, so I felt good. I'm not, telling something I shouldn't. And they were just saying, why can't you make decisions? Why is everybody saying, one school's doing this, one school's doing that? And I just tried to start to explain the complexity. And then I said, what about the teachers? What if you're a teacher and you have an elderly parent staying with you who is not in good health? You don't want to go back into an elementary school. I mean, I love those kids, but they're kind of germy. And then these women were just going, oh, and I said, it's very complex. So I like the detail that Mrs. Reed shared that showed how complex it is. And then when we finally come to a decision, HR is just going to be working overtime. And I appreciate our staff for their willingness to stand up, give their opinion, and then I know they'll do the best they can. Diana?
I just wanted to also say thank you, and thank you to the board and bringing the recommendation forward of giving us this extra month, because I'm not sure how, just looking at the timeline right now, I'm not sure how that would have even been possible without those those a couple of extra weeks. And I know it's going to be a lot of work and very intense to even get it done within this time frame. But I do appreciate that with that adjustment, and also with our bargaining units, that we were able to come to that agreement so that we could get the very best that we possibly could.
Okay. Any other comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you to the teachers that are on that committee. I'm pretty sure that after the last semester, all of you would like to be vacationing someplace where they would let you lay on the beach. But so please convey our appreciation. Thank you, Mrs. Reed. You've done a phenomenal work. And Dr. Frazier, thank you for the work you're going to be doing with the union, because I realize there's a lot of legalities and questions. So it's a puzzle, and you are amazing at working at it. So thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we will now go into closed session. Bye, Dave. Can you see us? I don't know if you can see us way here.
Yeah, you can.